Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. Today, we have the immense privilege of having Kara Ryska, the creator and host of the Special Needs Mom podcast, as well as the owner and founder of several different life coaching practices that she gets to utilize with not just the special needs moms community, but business coaching, and a whole lot of other things within that realm. So, Kara, I'm super excited to have you on here today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here.
Well, it's my privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I found your podcast at a time where I really needed the encouragement. I really needed to know that I wasn't alone in this new journey that we were on as kind of discovering who we are as a family now that we have a child with special needs. And it just, not just hearing your story, but the women that you brought on, the style of, coaching and questions that you asked them really just created this very nurturing, safe place for me to go. Like, we live a state, 2 states away, but it's like a place where I could go if I was having a day that I'm like, I just need to know that I'm not alone in this. And so I'm excited to have you on here today because I want to pick your brain about some common struggles that we as special needs moms face, how to find resilience, how to find strength and support in those areas. But I'd love for you to share whatever you're comfortable sharing about your journey with your family and kind of what brought you to launching that podcast and creating that space for people.
Yeah, well, I will obviously, it's a long journey, and so I'll share the really condensed version. So, in a very short story version, I have 4 children, and 12 years ago, at the time I had 2 children and I was pregnant. My at the time 2-year-old son got diagnosed with brain tumor. So, like you can only imagine, like our world just crumbled. Really had never faced anything like this with anybody close to me. And here it is, my essentially baby. I'm also pregnant at the time, right? So it was took quite a few years to recover. Let's say that. So he is profoundly affected by the impact of the tumor. And so we all of a sudden went from having a very typical family to a very non-typical family. And I would describe myself as naively under-resourced because I just did not have the it's not maturity. I got away with having a little bit of a sloppy relationship to myself and to my
Mm.
emotions and to all of it, and even to God. And so I got away with it up until then. And then this happened, and I was like, uh-oh, like, this is
Right.
way, way beyond the skill level I have. And of course, I
Uh-huh.
didn't know that at the time. But what
Right.
I knew at the time was that oh my gosh, like I was so dysregulated. I felt like I was spinning, literally spinning all the time. I would go into doctor's offices and I'd have the fluorescence lights on me and I would just feel like I was out of my body. But I didn't have the words for it
Mhm.
at that time. I literally just thought there was like something medically wrong with me. Um, and I can only imagine how much money I spent trying to fix myself. So I
Mhm.
came to learn and to understand that I just needed more support, and support specifically in understanding how to process my own emotions, to understand what was going on, to step out of feeling like it was all happening to me and as a victim, and to really kind of understand how to take back my power. And I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but really to understand about how not to just feel so helpless all the time when
Yeah.
in reality we are completely helpless against some of the things that happen to ourselves and our children. And so fast forward a little bit, I started my journey as a coach about 7 years ago. So I was like, I don't know, I guess 5 years into the whole being a mom of a special needs child. And I thought, it'd be kind of cool to be a coach. And I had zero intention. I love business. That's like what I loved. I love business. I loved women in leadership. Like it really just excited me. And so I thought, I'm going to start coaching. And I, jumped into a very extensive training program and coached for several years and had the idea of coaching special needs moms. But I was like, who am I? Like, I'm not there yet. Um,
Mhm.
but it was one of those emails from school that I got. And it was just that moment where I'm like, okay, like, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be alone in how I am experiencing these kinds of struggles. And so it was through that and some combination of conversations with some coaching colleagues that I was like, I have to coach this community. Like, this is the community that needs coaching more than anybody. So I started coaching parents, mothers specifically of children with all different disabilities. And then, of course, about 2 years ago, my son got diagnosed with recurrence. So I
Mm.
was rocking and rolling. I was like living my best life as a coach. It was, obviously, like, I had 4 kids. So, like, not like I was like
There's some
streaming
crazy times
through
in there too. Yeah.
unscathed, but, I was in a good spot. And so, kind of had to do another little refresh of like, okay, wow, this is challenging my skills again. I'm getting to actually really live all the things that I teach and I guess preach. So that was about 2 years ago. And I think you asked me when we got on the call, like, how are things going? I'm like, you know what? Like, it's still kind of hard. Like, if I'm honest, like, we're
Ah,
not rocking and rolling yet. Not everything's hard. There's some wonderful things in my life,
right.
but there's certainly some things that are, really pushing me up against some challenges, some upsets and anger and sadness. So
Absolutely.
that's that's that.
That was a beautiful nutshell. And I think it kind of leads into you tackled it when you were talking about not feeling helpless when you are helpless, because there's the reality that most of us, when we enter the realm of like, okay, now I'm in special needs parenting land, I have to learn a whole new language. I have to learn like how my life is different now, how my family's life is different now. That feels, I mean, that would remove the grounding for anyone. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like going to a foreign country, really. But like most times when you travel to a foreign country, you get to go home.
And your
and
and I would say and your life's not threatened or
and
the life of your
right.
child, right? Most of the time. Sometimes,
Exactly. So a
yeah.
little bit different circumstances, unless you're like fleeing for your life for some ungodly reason. But it brings us back to that place of we don't know when we get to leave or if we ever get to leave this new territory that we're in. And that alone can create feelings of like helplessness and anxiety. And we were chatting beforehand and you mentioned this a little bit about emotional regulation, because I think most of us as moms, we would say we're feeling stressed. We would use words like I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm tired all the time. We wouldn't use the word I'm dysregulated. But
Mhm.
the reality is that if you're in fight or flight, which most of us are because of the nature of how we have to care for our children, we are dysregulated. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's important actually to back up all the way to understand why we feel, why we have emotions. The reason we have emotions is so that our body, our actual physical body knows what to do and when. So
Hmm.
let's just use like, like the whole example of like if there's a threat out there, like if there is a lion coming towards you, you feel scared. When you feel scared, your body activates, it gets energized, it goes into action. And this would be where you probably would fight or flee, hopefully flee.
Right. Yeah.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
and so if you just think about that simplicity of like the reason we have feelings and emotions is to inform our body on what to do. And so I think that's really helpful to establish that because it creates feelings as an ally, as a resource, as an information path for us rather than a problem. I mean,
Hmm.
for myself, like I prior to like, like me fast like, rewind about 12 years ago, I'd be like, like you're supposed to be happy about 90% of the time. And then like maybe 10% of the time, like we can make room for like, maybe some sadness or some anger or
Right.
whatever. Um, but really a complete misunderstanding of like emotional balance and like actually that no, like there's going to be negative and or what we would perceive as negative and positive all the time. So I think it's important to establish why we feel um,
Right.
and recognize that our feelings don't come directly from circumstances. They come from the interpretation of what the circumstance means. So
Mm.
another example would be if we see somebody at the door, so let's just say, I work from home. Let's say someone comes to the door and I don't know them and they're knocking on the door. Well, I might interpret that as, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. They're going to break in.
Right.
Or I might interpret it as, oh, they must have a package for me and it's really important. And maybe I'm excited. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever information and data I have coming into whatever circumstance I'm coming into, we're going to interpret it differently. And the
Right.
reason it's important to distinguish those two things is because when we believe that we have to feel a certain way in any given circumstance, we are powerless.
Mm-hmm.
We have no ability to control that circumstance. So therefore, we're going to go wherever we think emotionally, where that circumstance, where it's leading
Right.
us. And if we don't learn to distinguish why we're feeling what we're feeling, and this again comes from our relationship, what we think about the
Right.
thing that's happening. So there's that, right? So that's kind of a good baseline to understand. So this is all happening, right? And it's happening like subconsciously, like we're not actively thinking about it until we learn to kind of bring it to our conscious mind. Then we have our nervous system, our actual nervous system. And you mentioned fight or flight, that's a nervous
Mhm.
system response. It's not an
Right.
intellectual response. That's what I think is important to distinguish here. But I
Mhm.
think it's important to recognize what state we're in. So you talked about dysregulation, and I think a lot of us will find ourselves in a situation. Perhaps I'll use an example from just a couple weeks ago. I'm trying to think what happened. I think it was something with a medical something or another. There was oh no, actually it was a home construction thing. And it happened in the afternoon where I became aware of like some significantly financially impacting problems that we were having with the home remodel thing. And it really, really activated me, right? And I use activated
Mhm.
for like it really threatened what I thought was like my well-being, which is like money in my bank account.
Yep.
And so I went to go pick up my kids and they were asking me questions and I was like not really there. I was there. I mean, I was
Mhm.
driving my car and picking them up. I was going through the motions, but I was really, really not able to be there. Like it took me an immense amount of focus to be able to even barely function. So I can
Mhm.
recognize that as wow, I'm really, really activated and dysregulated because I'm very upset about this thing.
Yep.
So being able to recognize when we're dysregulated is the critical part of then asking ourselves the question, what do we need? This is a
Right.
question that is a simple question, but it's kind of a hard question, in my opinion. I actually still have a really hard time answering that question a lot of the time. But again, if we don't even recognize there's something going on, like we don't have access to asking that question. And so when we recognize these patterns, or not even patterns, these moments or these instances of dysregulation, when we recognize we're not hearing people, when we recognize we're just not feeling present, when we have that out of body experience that I described in the doctor's office where I just didn't,
Right.
I felt
Yeah.
so disconnected to my body. Those kinds of moments, they're all examples of dysregulation. So I'll pause there to kind of, I've well caffeinated today. I'm very excited
I
about
love
this
it.
topic. So I'll pause there
I
to see
love
kind
it.
of where you want to go with that.
No, I think you explained it really well because it's like I said, most of us wouldn't describe it as dysregulated. We would use any other word like I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I am overstimulated, but those are all actually signs of dysregulation, right? And so if we can become aware of that, um, and this is something that I've really had to learn and practice over the years is how can I get my frontal lobe to
Mm-hmm.
engage with my nervous system and engage with the feelings and become aware of what's happening in my body. And one, just maybe practice some simple deep breathing to kind of get
Mm-hmm.
myself out of that space. And we'll talk about different strategies that we can use to do that. But if I'm not aware that it's happening in the first place, it's going to be very, very hard to shift out of that. And then the other thing that I wanted to share with that is that a lot of it two things. If we believe that we should be happy all the time under
Mm-hmm.
all of these circumstances that are extremely emotionally painful, not just emotionally painful, but emotionally stressful and financially stressful and stressful in the marriage. Like, that's not an appropriate emotional response. We should feel how we feel based on the circumstances. So even saying something like, you know what, I will stop myself and I'll put my hand on my heart and I will say, this is really tough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really uncomfortable right now. I hate
Mm-hmm.
this feeling of anxiety in my body, but that's actually a normal response to this kind of stressor. So I'm okay. And do a little bit of that, like trying to get my brain to talk to my frontal lobe and calm things down, right? But if we have that belief that we have to have it all together all the time and we have to be strong, and whatever it is that I'm sure as you're coaching women, we each kind of have our own like hardwired thought process that kind of tends to pop up in there, that belief of what we should be,
Mm-hmm.
that really keeps us from engaging with the emotions and then regulating. Would you say that that's true?
Well, yeah. And I think you've talked about something really important here, and you've talked about engaging with the frontal lobe. And here, especially in our culture, in our society, we really value intellect, we value education, we value our mind. But
Mhm.
we've kind of forgotten the whole thing about our whole body. And this happens
Yep.
like if you this is something where, I'm a Christian, and so I go to church and we see this all the time. There's a huge emphasis on your spirit, maybe on your
Yes.
mind, but like the body is like, "Oh, that doesn't matter that much. It's like fine." But
Yep.
like that's not actually biblical. And so
Right.
so actually it
Right.
was early on before I really became again aware of any of this that I was having a ton of physical symptoms during my pregnancy when my son was first diagnosed and in the hospital, and I couldn't take any medication for it because I was pregnant. And so I went to an acupuncturist. And it was really when it became so clear to me that what was happening in my body was a manifestation of what was happening in my mind, in my spirit, and all the
Yep.
things. And so
Mhm.
the reason I mention all that is because we kind of have forgotten and left behind the body. We try to solve all of these issues of dysregulations with our mind.
Yes.
And that is where we go wrong, because
Mhm.
when we try to solve it in our mind, we actually just work ourselves up more and more and more.
Right.
We can't you don't emotionally process with your mind. You emotionally process with your body.
Right.
So a lot of us
So
have
good.
never practiced this. We were never taught this. And I still have the experience because of, kind of where I came from. When I go and turn to my body to really pay attention, I'll just get like silence. I won't actually connect. It takes me a second to really connect to what's happening in
Mhm.
my body, which I've learned not to panic about. I'm not broken. It's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's okay.
Right.
It's still there. I'm very
Right.
functional, but it used to really work me up. That like I really must be broken. Um, but the body is, I think, sometimes the best place to start. Because if we start in our mind, again, we'll likely just work ourselves up and we'll totally miss the part that actually allows us to process emotions. So, where I like to start with when somebody, myself or somebody else, is really dysregulated, I like to start with anything that doesn't involve our mind. So, this is
Mhm.
actually things like breathing. You mentioned breathing. Some breathing does involve your mind because it's more of a
Mhm.
meditation type of breath.
Right.
There's some breathing that's purely physiological, where it just really taps into the very well known and understood patterns of your body to cue your body that you're okay. And so this is
Right.
what we're trying to do is when we're re-regulating, or I should say, yeah, undysregulating. I don't know what we say there. Um, you're telling your body that you're safe.
Right.
And we can't process these higher level intellectual things when we are unsafe. Like you
Right.
can't do it. Because the first thing that turns off, this I think is so interesting. If you have a lot of, yeah, for the listeners, if you have struggles in your relationship, especially with your husband or spouse, um, when you're dysregulated, the first thing to turn off is your hearing. So
Mm.
like your ears are actually still functional, right? Like they're going to hear
Right.
big noises, they're going to hear the things, but computation of information like really shuts
Goes
down,
out the window. Right.
goes out the window, right? So it's like you're thinking that you're functioning as a full human, but you're actually not. You're functioning as somebody that's not feeling safe. So they're not taking more information in. They're trying to just get safe. Okay. So like I said, I like to start with the body. So that's things like breathing. It's things like tapping. I don't know if you're familiar with EFT tapping.
Yeah.
My guess is that you are.
Hmm.
And that there we do bring intellect into that, certain parts of it, but it really, really heavily just taps into your like literally taps into your
Your
nervous
nervous
system.
system. Yeah.
So that can be really, really helpful. And then there's another exercise that I absolutely love, but it definitely is harder to get people to do this one, and it's called shaking and dancing. And you
Mm.
literally shake like a wild worm, like shake your body out, and you can do it to whatever music you want, but like really, I'm going to say aggressively shake, and you shake it
Hmm.
out. And this just allows your nervous system to complete the cycles that it started of fear and upset. This one is particularly helpful when I've had a really hard morning with my son and his behavior. Because in the moment, I got to keep my stuff together. I
Right.
can't, or I should say, I choose not to process it in the moment because I just want to get through it. I'm surviving it.
Right.
But then, I get the kids to school, I get done, going to go start my day. But I'm feeling out of sorts. Just I'm upset, but
Activate a little bit. Yeah.
activated. Exactly. And so this
Mhm.
allows me to process that in a way that just feels very connecting. So what happens for me, and I think a lot of people, when you're re-regulated, is you feel very connected to yourself. You feel you're embodied, like you're inside of your body in a way that feels comfortable and safe to you. So that can be a really, really helpful thing. And then I think also, like, I think one thing that comes to mind is connecting. Like connecting with other human beings is very regulating. Sharing your
Hmm.
story is very regulating. Being witnessed in wherever you are, like upset, sad, happy, is very regulating. So,
Hmm.
all of these things, and there's a lot of different ways to, of course, process emotions that I teach my clients. But I think that's a good start, kind of talking about some of those options.
Absolutely. Well, they're great options because they're things that you can do fairly in the moment. Like they're
Hmm.
not require, let's say, maybe you are getting counseling or maybe you're doing some trauma work to really work through, because this is the thing, as a special needs mom, our likelihood of developing something like complex PTSD is pretty high. It
Hmm.
I would say very commonly, but it's very commonly misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed as just a generalized anxiety disorder. But really it is more in the realm, I would say, of complex PTSD. I'm not a diagnostician, so don't hear me like diagnosing you, but I'm just saying that does require different tools.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
even if we're in therapy and we're going and we're getting regular support, which most of us are going to need at one or various points throughout the journey, we still need to have tools day to day, right? That are going to help us to move through that process while we're working through kind of some of the bigger things. So I love those strategies. And it is something that, I teach a lot of my clients as well. Like, what can we do in the moment? Get your breath going.
Hmm.
Don't be focusing so much on your thoughts. It's very hard to have, like you said, logical. I can hear logic chirping away at me, telling me I'm going to be fine and everything's okay, but the rest of me is so activated that it's not going anywhere. And it's because we're addressing the wrong part of the body when we try to do that. And usually once we regulate, then you'll start to notice your thoughts are calmer. They're more, you can actually
Hmm.
plan, you can actually come up with a problem solving solution instead of, freaking out and doing all the things that we do kind of on the way to getting there.
Yeah, definitely.
So in the realm of support, what are some things, because that you find have been helpful for you along the journey to really gain not just the internal resources that you need for the duration of the journey that we all know is unpredictable, right?
Hmm.
Um, what are some resources that you've used for yourself? And within that, I think it would be good for us to talk about how to overcome the challenges to actually getting those supports too, because I think that's probably the bigger hurdle. At least it was for me, when we're allocating all of our resources, to getting our child better. How do we reallocate some of that to ourselves when we need it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really, really good thing to look at because I think, if all the things are out there, but we don't feel like we can access them, we haven't really gotten anywhere. Well, I'd say if I just start with the things that have been most supportive to me, I would say obviously coaching. Like I'm not just a coach, I'm also a client, and so I feel like um, building up those tools, those skills, capabilities that I didn't have before has been profoundly helpful. Turns out having somebody else reflect back to you what you might not see yourself. It's like you looking in a mirror, right? Like
Yep.
I'm sure I could do my makeup pretty well, like not having a mirror because like done it like a million times. But I'm sure there would be some things that would have been beneficial to have a mirror, helping
Yeah.
me see what I may
That's a
not
good
see on my
analogy.
own. So that's coaching in a nutshell. I think the other
Mhm.
thing that stands out as a major, major, major support for me then and now is community. And so my
Mhm.
community looks, I'm fortunate that actually I feel like I have a very complex in a good way community. I have groups from college, I have groups from high school, local, afar. And then I have a very rich, I mean, I feel like one of the byproducts of the podcast is like I get to be at the epicenter of this community. And I feel like um I don't know, like it's immeasurable, I think, on the gifts that gives me. So, community of being amongst people, women who really understand, and can hold space for where you're at without trying to change or fix you. And so this is
Right.
also why I coach in community, for the special needs mom program I have, because, um, like, I mean, I wish I had I'm sure there is scientific studies on this, and I wish I had them to reference. But what I can say experientially is that the power of witnessing another human being experiencing what you're experiencing, yet when you're experiencing, you have shame and judgment and a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. But when you're
Mhm.
witnessing another human, you have compassion. Compassion is easier. Kindness is easier. You
Yes.
totally can see, wow, that's really hard. And so being in that space where you're witnessing that, I think brings more access to being able to witness it for yourself and be like, oh,
Mm.
yeah. So maybe I don't need to be so hard on myself.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to recognize that all I need is grace right now. I don't know.
Mm.
Um, so where were we going? So community, I think, is a huge thing. I think,
Completely.
and that is one where um there are both completely free resources and there's paid resources, right? And this is one
Mhm.
where I'd say more important than actually well, let me back up. So one of the impediments I think is time and money, right? So one, we
Absolutely.
feel like we
Mhm.
don't have that time bandwidth, and then we don't have that financial bandwidth. And the way that I look at that is that a lot of us try to, when we're looking to create something, we start with how, like how we're going to do it. And we
Mhm.
usually get tripped up because we don't see how, we don't know how, we don't have the thing. So, of course, we don't know how. So, really kind of reversing it and saying, well, what are you trying to create? And getting really clear that you're trying to create support. And so maybe support looks like coaching or community or therapy. That's one I didn't mention for myself. Medication, like for me, has been really,
Mhm.
really helpful for my mental health. Um,
Absolutely.
and so recognizing, okay, well, what I'm trying to create, and I'll use myself as the example, is I'm trying to create a non-anxious, no, um, a well-balanced, I
We'll
joke
start
because
there. That's a good place to start.
anxiety is
It's
like
relatable.
definitely,
It's relatable.
I'm still, I mean, I still have very anxious days, um,
Mhm.
even with as many tools and resources and how much
Yeah.
I do practice it. So I think it's important to say like it's not like, oh, we learn these things and everything's totally great.
Everything's
But so
fine.
what
Yeah.
I'm trying to achieve is like a well-supported, connected experience, right? Where I feel like I have the resources for myself and my kids and my relationship with my husband. And so then we can ask the question after we know what we want, what we need. Remember that question, what do we need? Then we can say, well, how can I get that? And for some of us, that how may be paying. And for some of
Right.
us, that how may not be paying. It may be, okay, what is available for free? I mean, for everyone listening, this is a free podcast, right? So this is a free
Right.
resource that if you really, if you listen every week to your podcast, like I'm sure if everyone implemented what you are teaching, right? Like
Right.
you probably wouldn't have any clients. No, just kidding. Because they'd be like, she's giving all of the good
Yeah.
information here. No, I'm joking. But I think really recognizing that some of us really just stop when we don't see an immediate path, especially
Mm,
with the money
yeah.
one, right? Where it's like, okay, well, you look at all the different ways I spend my money. I know that I don't have like, all those dollars that I want to invest sitting in my bank account. So the answer is no, I can't have that thing. Oftentimes, if you give yourself a chance to really explore, well, what are my options? There's sometimes a way you can say, well, you know what? My option is I'm going to pick up 2 extra hours of work. And,
Right.
obviously this is not going to work for everybody, but like pick up 2 extra hours, or I'm going to, cut out my cleaner for a couple months or whatever.
Right.
You do have more
There's some
options than
wiggle
a lot of
room.
times we realize. There's a lot, and I'm going to say a lot of supporting organizations that may help you. This is actually really cool. I want to share this for anybody that is part of any particular syndrome or foundation, because something this last year that we did was I had a client, and she completed the program. She loved it. And she said, I want to bring this to my syndrome for her child's community. And I want us to sponsor the group as part of our support for this network of moms and parents, actually. So we created a custom program for their group,
Wow.
excuse me. And so they are scholarship. Like the people in that group aren't paying out of their own pocket. The organization is paying for them as a
Amazing.
way of supporting, right? And some of them, like, I would
Yeah.
never be able to afford this, but it's like life changing for them. And what's interesting to me about this one, and my fear was if they weren't paying, they weren't going to value it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually the very opposite. Like this group shows up like no other.
Yeah.
They do the in-between work. They watch all the modules of education I have. They show up every week for coaching. They've got each
Wow.
other's
Come
back.
on.
Like it's amazing. So that's what I'm saying is like if you
Yeah.
get clear on what you want, there are resources. We do have to work through that immediate response of I don't have that, I can't have that, or I don't see a way. So that's a long way of
Right.
saying, we have to be a little more creative, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely. And also recognizing it can be hard to be creative when we're in such a like a deep
Mhm.
stress space. And this is where um for me what I found the most helpful is like getting outside of myself, if that makes sense. So like I will talk to my husband. I'll be like, I need you to be logic for me because logic is not it's not working right now. It's like all emotion and he's really good at that. So we'll talk it out and he'll be like, well, we could do A, B, C, or
Mhm.
D. Like which most sense to you right now. Or if your spouse or your partner isn't in that space to be that for you, friends can be really helpful for that, or a therapist, right? Um, I have found when we're talking about creating community, I think that's probably one of the harder things to do because it takes a lot of intentionality and it takes a lot of um having to put yourself out there when you're already feeling vulnerable and kind of exposed, if that makes sense. Or I'll just speak to myself. That's how I felt. Because like a lot of people, our daughter was neurotypical until she was 7, right? 7 or 8. I think it's all kind of a blur in there. I'm like, I think she was 8. Was she 7? Yeah, somewhere around there. And so friendship dynamics changed, our community changed, our family, like extended family dynamics changed as far as what support looked like. And so once I got clear though, and it took me longer than I wish that it had, I wish that I had been so much kinder to myself to recognize how hard it actually was.
Yeah.
Those first 2 years of her diagnosis. I look back and I'm like, gosh, I just want to hug. I want to hug
Mm,
younger me. That was so hard, and I wish that I had, not with shame or any condemnation or anything like that, but just like, wow, that was really tough. And the
yeah.
support was absolutely needed. But once I got clear that we were in a space where I needed people to be showing up for me in a different way, I can't remember if I've done an episode on this or not. I reached out to 5 or 6 friends and I said, look, we're still in dumpster fireville. I don't remember what I called it, but like things are still on fire. We'll just put it that way. And we still need a lot of help. And my
Mm.
daughter's still having pretty regular neurological flares and regressions at this point in her healing process. And these are the things that I know that I will need on really hard weeks, like somebody to bring me dinner or bring us dinner, somebody to take my youngest child so she gets a break from the nonsense, right? Somebody to, if you want to just come by and fold 2 loads of laundry. And what I'm asking, and this was my big ask, and this was really hard for me, but my friends were like, I loved it. It was so
Mm-hmm.
helpful to
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what you needed. I just said, I'm just going to SOS you and you can pick anything off that list. Like, because I'm not going to be able to tell you what I need. Like, that's just a fact. On those hard weeks, it's not going to happen. And that alone, especially when we didn't at that point, we had spent our life savings, we had
Mm-hmm.
tapped into like retirement funds, we tapped into everything that we could. My
Mm-hmm.
husband and I were working as hard as we could to bring in extra finances, but the reality was that we didn't have the extra to pay for outside support, like childcare support. And so that was the best resource that we had. And I will say, above and beyond it meeting our physical and emotional needs, or physical needs of helping to take the load off, right? It brought that sense of safety back that we didn't even know how desperately we were missing that because we, like I said, friendships, relationships, dynamics really changed for us in that. And so you begin to feel very isolated, and that's not a good place to be. None of us are meant to be there long. None of us are. There are seasons of it, but I think I got so desperate at that point that I was like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
really, if they're going to be the friends that stay, then they're going to be the friends that stay. And like, it's just going to work out one way or the other. And once the weight started to kind of lift, then I noticed I had started to have some brain space to kind of brainstorm, and I started reaching out for grants and services, and we ended up getting a respite grant and for somebody to come in and give me a break
Mm-hmm.
because we're during the summer, and so now she's home all day
Mm-hmm.
long. So it's behaviors all day long, right? There is no
Mm-hmm.
break, and so there are, like you said, those resources available, and I think it kind of reminds me of that song in Frozen, "Do the Next Right Thing."
Uh-huh.
um, where Anna's trying to get out of the cave, right? And she's like, just do the
Mm-hmm.
next right thing. That is 100% what it feels like. I just have to do the next thing. And that's going to help me to figure out the thing after that. It's like we can't eat the whole elephant at one time. We just have to start taking those little action steps to finding the resources that we need. So I know that's something that for me, I just kind of had to get rid of my cares and my whatever people thought of me, and just find a way through the madness.
Well, what also want to highlight, because I mean, it's just such a great example of like the resources that you found. I want to highlight though, the one thing you did have to do is to step into that extra vulnerability. I think what's really hard is that you were already so vulnerable because the life that you were living just in your home. Like
Mhm,
I experienced, like, gosh, like
mhm.
when the well being of your family is at stake, it's very, very vulnerable. And then
Absolutely.
you had to go to that next level of being able to actually say, I need help. And to me, I think that's very vulnerable.
It is.
Um, Even though like intellectual, like, oh no, I want to help anybody. And like, like we have a lot of mind um
Mhm.
beliefs around it, but we have something a little deeper that actually is undermining that. So that's why I think it's
Yep.
still very vulnerable. But it's beautiful that you were able to get high enough in the clarity of like, okay, these are the things I might need when I'm really in the thick of it. So that, and also acknowledging that in the moment, you won't know that, because that's brilliant that you can identify that. And so I don't know, like, I hope that others will follow that lead of what you did. Because certain times people outside of our world, they see certain things and they're like, oh, you probably need some help now, right? So like when we have a hospitalization, they're like, that's a cue. Oh,
Yes.
maybe she needs some help.
Right.
But what they don't realize is that like our regular life with appointments and therapies and all the different things has
Absolutely.
its own challenges too. So that's where it does rely on us to share our story. And like I said, it's
Yes.
vulnerable. So,
It
yeah.
is so vulnerable, and it was so hard for me, and I remember sending it and, like, I wanna undo send so bad, but
Mhm.
iPhone didn't have that feature yet, so I couldn't do it, and it was before that feature, but I was like, "I'm gonna send it and, like, run away to another room because this is
Yeah.
so uncomfortable for me." But I did end up getting, even more detailed of like, because I had friends that they had the finances. They're like, can we bring you groceries? Can we go grocery shopping for you this week? And so I literally, thank God for like the Instacart app, I would just put stuff on that list and screenshot it to them and like, get whatever you want. Like, any of this is going to bless us. So, like, it's just something, it's the one less thing that I have to do, because maybe you can't outsource somebody driving your child
Mhm.
to the therapy appointment because you have to be there, because you have to talk to the therapist and you have to get feedback and you have to, like, there are things that only we can do in the journey. And so I think that's where we have to get really, really clear, even beyond the what do I need, with what is not dependent on me to do. Like, what can anybody else do? Anybody can clean a toilet, right?
Totally.
Anybody can fold laundry.
I want to add something here that I think it's important for us to acknowledge is that back, we were talking about being emotionally dysregulated, and that's um when we are in fight or flight, we are often very controlling because we're trying to control our exterior environment to control our interior experience. And so this control piece, I think, is where a lot of women particularly get misled, because
Mm,
being in that control state, they're not able to see what they can actually allow other people into. And so I
yeah,
think it's important to acknowledge that, because a lot of people would say, well, nobody can come in and help my child the way I do.
yeah,
And I don't agree. I don't agree. No one's going to
right,
be their mother, but I do agree. I would say that it's probably possible that somebody can care for your child if they learn, not
right,
maybe day one, right? So that's just an example of where, if
totally.
you're in a place where you're like, nobody can help with anything, I have to do it all. I want that to be a little red flag to be like, what
Mhm,
maybe am I not seeing because I am in a state of survival or fear or just
right.
feeling over vulnerable. So I want to mention that.
No, I think that's really, really good. And I think I've definitely been challenged with that at different points, because, part of our journey was not medication management. We didn't end up going the route of medication for her, but we did do other like medicinal therapies with specialists and things like that. And they're very like titrated, very specific. I mean, exactly what that's like. Insulin is no joke, right? And ours
Mhm.
was not that, but it was a similar type of way of thinking, where it's very specific based on a lot of different variables throughout the day: stress, diet, sleep, infections, all of those things. And so, but my husband and I were like, we desperately need a break. Like, we need to be able to go out of town. And she's at a place where she's fairly stable, but I now have to teach somebody how to do this, and what to look for to know when those things are, right? So that they can give her the
Mhm.
appropriate dose at the
Mhm.
appropriate time. And it was hard, because I'm like, am I actually going to be able to enjoy going out of town, because I'm going to be thinking about it the whole time? But it was somebody we trusted, somebody that I knew would communicate very clearly with me um at any point in the journey. But it was like, it's like leaving your baby for the first time. I kind of describe it
Mhm.
like that in the realm of special needs parenting, because if we have that belief that we're the only one that can do this job, I mean, we really, it doesn't even have to be perfect. I'm just like, I mean, keep them alive most of the time, keep them alive, and maybe a little bit more than that, and we'll be okay. We'll be okay for
Mhm.
2 hours. So I do think letting go of that is hard, and recognizing the anxiety or the fear, like, what is the real fear that you have behind that?
Yeah.
Because it's never just control, right? There's always fear behind it. And so, what is my fear behind that? Is my fear that we're going to have a really bad day the next day? And can we handle that as a family? Is my fear that something horrible is going to happen when I'm gone, and it's going to, like, all of us have those different fears. So, I think even giving room, like you said, to one, be aware that if you're thinking that way, there's some red flags. But two, diving into that a little bit deeper and saying, why am I afraid of this, and is this something that I need more tools to work through.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And we actually had, just to give a recent example of this. So 2 years ago, when my daughter started school, and I know we're wrapping up here, but I think this gives a really good example of the whole dysregulation thing that can happen very, very suddenly. And sometimes you don't even see it coming, honestly. Like you might think that you're so far beyond that hospitalization that was so traumatizing, or that experience that was so traumatizing, right? And then there's just something that, boom, brings it all right back to the surface. And again, it's not really your mind, it's your nervous system. And then your mind is responding to your nervous system. So 2 years ago, my daughter had a massive regression flare, neurological flare that we didn't see coming. She'd never had problems in school before, never had school refusal before, even though that's actually really common for kids with pandas to have school refusal, school anxiety, whatever you want to call it. And something happened 2 weeks into the school year where she could not get into the classroom. I could not physically get her out of the car. And we tried for like 6 weeks, all of the different strategies, getting the school counselor on board. That was a whole other horrible experience that I won't go into. And so every year when school starts, I start to have this panicky feeling, right?
Yeah.
Now, this year, it was like 90% improved upon last year. Last year, it was like 3 months before school started. I was just a hot mess. This year, it was like 3 days before. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of a normal response given what I've walked through before. There's a lot of variables to this. I was able to fairly regulate myself with that. But she got sick the second week of school and had some neurological symptoms and started to have some school anxiety. And so then I'm brought into this place of there's still some more trauma here. There's still some fear here that I need to address that. And then just giving yourself that permission, like I had to give myself permission to clear my schedule a little bit. I'm going to make
Nice.
room for this
Yeah.
big thing that feels really big to me right now. It won't be so big later, but right now it's really big. And was able to get in and do some EMDR and different breathwork stuff and felt just immensely better. So there are some times where like I could recognize that all the tools that I had at home, the tapping, the breathing, the sleep, stuff that I was doing wasn't enough for that particular trauma or
Yeah.
particular memory or what have you. So I don't remember what my point was with that other than to say that that it kind of ties back into your point about like we don't really get there. Like there's no there to get where we're never anxious, we're never fearful, we're never sad or disappointed. And I think having that expectation of ourselves sets us up for shame, right? And lacking in self-compassion, and then not being able to move forward because we're
Yeah.
kind of stuck in that mind web.
Yeah. I really had a hard time giving up on the idea that there's not a place of arrival. I held on. I held
I
on
don't
tight to
like it
that
either.
idea. Um,
I
and
don't like it either.
man, wouldn't it be great if there was though? See, I'm still having a hard time letting go of
I
it.
know. I haven't
But
accepted it yet, Kara. I'm not
yeah,
there yet.
I'm still, I think I'm probably, if I'm honest, still working on that too. But and I think it's a good
Yeah.
example of, we can make so much progress. And like I said, like, I thought I was rocking and rolling until about 2 years ago. And then I realized, okay, still a lot to work on here. Which is
Yeah.
great, and awful at the same
It's
time.
great and awful. Yeah. It keeps us humble in a certain kind of way. And it does, it's just, I kind of look at it like this is the journey this side of heaven, like it's not
Yeah.
perfect, it's messy, it's difficult, and yet we can still choose to make something good out of it. We can still choose to show up differently in spite of that. Like I'm not going to allow these circumstances to determine whether or not I'm going to fight for joy, or fight for health or a healthy relationship in my marriage or my kids to grow up, feeling supported and loved in spite of this difficult thing that we're walking through. And I think you teach that so well. And I loved everything that you shared. I feel like we could probably do like a whole bunch more episodes on that, just all of the different nuances of this. But I would love for you to share if you have any like final parting thoughts and then where people can find you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, parting thoughts. I mean, I think what comes to mind is, um, I think what we often don't realize is a lot of the work starts with simple shifts in being kind and compassionate to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
This is a skill that I was particularly bad at. And I love this story because I think it is, like you said, you look back at your previous version of yourself and you just want to give her a hug. I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I didn't understand compassion, to be perfectly honest. I remember Googling, how do I have self-compassion? I was like, I am so profoundly confused about this. I'm Googling it. If only Chat GDP was there, because like maybe they would have given me a
Right.
step-by-step guide. But I was really, and you can tell I was intellectually trying to do
Yeah. Right.
compassion. And again, I love that story because it does show our capacity for growth.
Right.
And I hope everyone's like laughing at me in a loving kind of way right now. But I share that because it's not huge shifts that you just boom make. It's like being 1% more kind to yourself,
Yeah.
bringing 1% of kindness and compassion to yourself. Like that makes the biggest difference in the world. So that's what I want to leave
Mm,
everybody with. And
yeah.
if you're kind of like, I don't know how to do that. Okay, go back to the part where we talked about getting support and help and community, because community is really, really good for this. So,
Yes.
and then where to find me. So I'm easily found on all the podcast players at the Special Needs Mom Podcast. And that is also my Instagram handle, the Special Needs Mom Podcast. And I'll mention I have a podcast group that is a closed community. It's really only it's pretty I heavily guard it from other people trying to get in there and advertise stuff and be creepos.
Yes.
But it's a place where I just offer like other opportunities to connect. We kind of do some monthly huddles, is what I call them.
Awesome.
So that's a great resource as well that is free. Very easy to access. So I'd love to hear from anybody if anyone has any questions or wants to hear more about anything. Like I'm easy to find.
Yes, you are. And her podcast is amazing. If any of this resonated with you, I cannot recommend it enough. I'm not always able to binge listen to every episode, but definitely, in weeks where I'm like, I need some Kara in my life. I need some support. I need the stories. I need the nuggets right now, absolutely cannot recommend her enough. So thank you again, Kara, for spending time with me today and just encouraging my listeners. I hope they definitely take you up on the opportunity to follow you and learn from you. And thank you so much again for being on today.